I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, and this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast, sponsored by Small Church Connections here in Canada. Well, I look forward to our guest today. I've known him for a number of years, have appreciated very much his ministry and desire for ministry. So I'm going to jump right in and just ask him to introduce himself, give a little bit of his ministry background, and then we're going to just do a little chatting about some of the things that I think both of us see are necessary for small church leaders and pastors as we look into the future. So take it away, Blayne. All yours.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So my name is Blayne Banting. I teach pastoral theology and preaching and spiritual formation for ministry at Briercrest College and Seminary in Cairnport, Saskatchewan. And I have been involved in ministry in one way or another as an ordained servant for a little over 45 years now, which I guess means I was ordained when I was 3.
Yeah, it seems like that'd be close.
Yeah. So, and a good portion of that, about half the time, I've spent in pastoral ministry. The other half has been more related to something similar to what I'm doing now, teaching in a college or seminary context. So, been able to pastor in Alberta and in Saskatchewan and in Prince Edward Island, and have taught in a couple different schools, Briercrest, of course, being the one where I am presently, and then taught in a small Bible college called Maritime Christian College in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. So I was born and raised on a farm in west central Saskatchewan, product of a small church. Many of the churches, well, several of the churches that I pastored would qualify as small churches. A couple of them were a little bigger than that. No mega church, but either a small church or a medium-sized or larger church. And so I guess the whole small church DNA has been baked right into me. And so, those are my people. And that's my default mode, and so the interest that I have in this topic and this approach to ministry is something that has been with me ever since I can remember.
All right, so I'm just going to jump in with a little personal thing here. I'm a West Central Saskatchewan guy too, born in a place called Kindersley, Saskatchewan. And growing up, my dad sold the farm, came back as a pastor, left, came back as a pastor, retired here. Where were you originally? You said West Central Saskatchewan. Where did you start out?
So we were a little further east than you, but I grew up outside of a small town called McCrory. Went to high school at Outlook. Yep. We would always drive through Kindersley on the way to Calgary.
Well, of course.
So, because all roads lead to Kindersley, right? So, or at least through Kindersley.
Through Kindersley, yes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was the area. I grew up close to the Gardner Dam, Diefenbaker Lake area there, and our farm was not exactly on the edge of the earth, but we could kind of see it from there.
I've been by there. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that certainly gives an interesting perspective, as you say, to the whole idea of both rural and small town, but also small church approaches. So let me ask you a question. When you're teaching in the whole area of spiritual formation, now I've ventured through the back and forth of what on earth you define that as over the years, and people have tried to come up with why don't you go at it and just tell us what you think spiritual formation is?
Well, usually the best way to kill anything is try to define it.
Exactly.
So and spiritual formation is no different. Largely, a spiritual formation is just how followers of Jesus are formed into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Jesus. And it is, a cousin to a number of other approaches like mentoring and discipling and directing and a lot of those things. But spiritual formation pays attention to the life of the believers, of a believer in community,
Mhm.
as they grow to be more and more like Jesus, growing into what actually we have been given already as followers of Jesus, but making that an actuality in practice. So it's that lifelong process of growing in grace, becoming mature in Christ.
So,
And I guess that's as close as I could get at, off the top of my head to defining the indefinable.
well, let's just try jumping over to the cousins and saying, so some of these cousins, mentoring, whatever it may be, how would they differ in a sense? Are they, and well, I could give my own thoughts on that, but I'll let you just say some of those cousins that you've mentioned.
Well, so discipling or disciple making, we're trying to help people learn how to follow Jesus, and that obviously is closely related to becoming like him. But the emphasis normally is in the act of intentional following.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the whole idea of mentoring is a personal relationship, and that dovetails with a lot of what spiritual formation is, especially spiritual direction, in that it is a person to person
Yeah.
kind of relationship where there is mutual accountability. And coaching tends to be a little more skill focused, where you would have an executive coach or a life coach come alongside, give some helpful feedback on how you can get better at doing something.
Mhm.
So spiritual formation or even spiritual direction has a lot of those aspects to it, but it primarily is paying attention to the spiritual dimension of life, so that we find ways in which all of our lives are encompassed by a sense of loving God,
Mhm.
following him, serving him, and growing in the process. So the borders are porous,
Yeah.
but it does seem like spiritual formation does tend to have a rather broad focus. So sometimes it's a little hard to rein it in as to what exactly it entails. But sometimes even knowing how it does relate to some of its cousins keeps you a little closer to being on the path, because it's very easy to get lost in the weeds
Yes.
on this, and you can start try chasing certain things, and one thing leads to another, and then you wake up and you find yourself a little far afield from where you wanted to get. And so sometimes the hardest thing is just knowing your limits in some of this, and following those that contribute most to your development as a lover of the triune God.
Okay, you've brought up a whole question, which I'll try and pursue. Sorry, this is a whole question. It's not on the questions I asked you, so which makes it for even more fun. But as you pursue, you've talked a little bit about each of us being individuals in a sense. Uh, what we pursue. How do we determine who we are, what we should be pursuing for the sake of spiritual formation?
Well, that's always a very difficult and leading question to those of us
It
who've been
is.
raised from our mother's milk, imbibing an individual's spirit.
Mhm.
We we are very, very focused on self. We live in an era of what I call the sovereign self, where everything is filtered through our own understanding, our own identity, our own agenda, all those sorts of things. So how on earth can an isolated sovereign individual make the proper call of learning how to grow in the grace of Christ? And for this, quite frankly, we are dependent upon the church. We cannot do this on our own. Spiritual formation is a team sport, and it always has been, even though well-meaning people have taken it in other directions. I think the spiritual formation's home is always within the believing community, and that believing community has a long-standing tradition. that shows us how our previous brothers and sisters have grown in their relationship with the triune God. And so they have left us all kinds of helpful examples and disciplines and testimonies to help us uh, determine where we should be spending our time and the direction in which we should be going. So we're not in a vacuum. We stand on the shoulders of those who come before us, and by understanding that to be the case, that helps us deal with some of the flurry of choices that face all of us in every dimension. We're overwhelmed by
Mhm.
choice in our current world, and so part of our difficulty and part of our paralysis of analysis is that there's just too many choices to make, too many options out there. And so true spiritual formation helps to form us, to show that there are ditches
Mhm.
alongside the road, and you can go too far, and you don't have to do so in a prescribed way. You can do so in a way that God has created you and your community, even though it may not look exactly like everyone else. I mean, my my perception growing up, a person who was into spiritual formation would be someone from a high church tradition, very contemplative,
Mhm.
kind of levitated about 6 inches above the ground. Thought Wendell Berry was a real farmer. Those were the things that constituted your capacity. And I came along. I was none of those things. I came from a very low church tradition. I am a fidgeter. I come from generations of fidgeters. I am anything but contemplative. I am always kind of like, I'm always wired. Ken Shigematsu talks about having 14 monkeys in your head. Well, I might have 140. So it was a bit of an uphill climb to realize, does God really want me to focus on my relationship with Him when I don't seem to have all the requisite tools? And so part of that is just recognizing that we come from within a tradition. That tradition is broad, but it's a tradition nonetheless, and informs the way we go about this. Because thankfully, we're not the first ones or the only ones to ever need to do this or think about this.
Okay, so let's jump into your own personal journey. What type of spiritual formation, what has led you into an experience of spiritual formation? Yeah, I mean, you've given us a good idea of, the fidgeter. I get that. I get a number of the things you're talking about. So where have you ended up?
Well, I guess I've grown in my journey in spiritual formation the same way I've grown in every other area of my life, and that's by doing it wrong first. So it's just perpetual experimentation, being open to other things that I had not thought of before, and on some occasions gloriously failing at that, and in other occasions finding something that was very life-giving and formative and important on my journey. So I started by just trying things here and there. I think there are some fundamental spiritual disciplines that all of us as believers should be experiencing and growing in. So that the discipline of prayer in its many approaches and avenues. I mean, that's fundamental. Uh, the reading and understanding and engaging with Scripture is something that everyone should have as kind of a foundational building block. There's all kinds of different ways to do so,
Mhm.
and so I made the large change from reading for information, which was trying to get as much read as possible, and making sure I went through my Bible in a year program, and got awful fidgety if I ever fell behind. And I left the reading for information to leading for formation and transformation, and that means that I don't read as much at a time anymore. I try to read it more slowly, more pensively, and I find that has been helpful in my understanding of interacting with the word. I hear God preaching to me. I hear God speaking to me as I settle down a little bit and try to listen more closely. So I mean, you could call that lectio divina if you like, which is it's
Yeah.
a part of that. But I learned that discipline almost by accident, by recognizing I just was not feeling the sense of fulfillment of feeling a connection to the God of the Bible after trying to read my chapters for the day and keep on a schedule. So that just seemed to mitigate against the personal dimension of that. So that was part of how I went through that. Silence and solitude. Um, I just learned that I needed that. Otherwise, my life would be probably coming apart at the seams. So you just needed to get away on occasion, and so I just started with small snippets, and worked from there. My first foray into a silent retreat was a complete disaster. So I bit off way too much, and I was heading from a time of teaching ministry out in Prince Edward Island. I was going to enter into the lead pastor role at the church where we attended. Our our pastor, my friend, had died suddenly of a heart attack, and all of this kind of developed on, and I ended up, I guess, being the heir apparent, and I knew I needed to do some serious work before I left the classroom to the church. So some friends offered me this beautiful stone cottage by a
Mm.
lake in New Hampshire, away from everyone by miles, and I was to spend 2 whole weeks in utter silence and solitude, separated from everyone else by miles, in this beautiful stone cottage with the waves lapping against the shore. And it was a phenomenal, idyllic situation. And I started, the first day saying, "This is amazing. No one will ever find me here." And then by noon, I realized no one's going to find me here. What's going to happen? What if I have a heart attack? And I started developing chest pains, and yeah, it was a fiasco. And I just threw myself into work in those 2 weeks of silence and solitude. Like I read 12 books. I walked for about 20 miles. I planned a year of sermons. Like my fidgety self took over. So I realized I can't do that. I can't bite that much off all at once. So I just started incrementally developing that and growing in that. I have a chair in our family room where I just sit, and no one bothers me. Well, our nest is empty, so
Yeah.
that's much easier now. Uh, but I just do that for 15 minutes in a morning, and that seems to be sufficient to slow me down for the day and focus me and anchor me. But you just need to kind of start small and learn your way into it, blunder your way into it, and not be too worried about your performance in some of that, because part of spiritual formation is getting away from a performance mentality and developing a receptive mentality. You're not the one that's calling the shots here.
Mhm.
You're just sitting there waiting on the Lord and letting him take the initiative. And that's a hard thing for a perennial fidgeter to do. That's a hard thing for most of us to do because
Yeah.
we're so married to what we do.
So let me now, good activities, but you've also mentioned that it's a community activity in one way for spiritual formation. How would you what would you see that looking like as a community, I guess, corporate spiritual formation, if you want to call it that?
Well, I mean, that's the reality of our Christian faith, and I think we have lost sight of that
Mhm.
in the Western church, where we have really individualized our walk with Jesus to the detriment of everyone. And so I think just to recover corporate or the communal nature of our faith. You read the scriptures, and they are inherently communal. We read about God's people in both the Old and the New Testament. There is a sense where we are persons, we are individuals, but we are individuals in community,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know who we are, frankly, without that interaction of those around us. None of us are self-made people. We're all a product of our relationships. We're all a part of a larger communal body where we're called to grow together. And quite frankly, that makes spiritual formation harder, but it makes it deeper. And if you just kind of go down your own little individual well, you're not really getting any closer to God, because you've walled yourself off from all those that God has ordained that you grow alongside. So they always say you could choose your friends, but you're stuck with your family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's who we are in the body of Christ. These are family. These people that are irritating and draining and amazing,
Yep.
all at once. And so part of that is being able to balance the individual and the communal, and that's, balance is something that we have a hard time with. But if we start with recognizing that we're in this together, then some of the things that we do would be a little more communally focused. We'd make a little better use of the things where we are already together, and then hopefully that whets our appetite to be together more in different ways in different contexts.
I I'm currently working with a young man on writing a book, and we're talking a little bit about the idea that we've got the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, but maybe we need to get down to understanding the great community that we have and the spiritual formation that comes. So not just vertical but horizontal approach or approaches to that. Now let me hone in a little bit on that. Small church, small pastors, they're not small, but small church people. Are there approaches that small churches have that maybe are very, very advantageous to spiritual formation that we might not see in a larger church?
Well, I think there is an opportunity for the small church that maybe we have not realized. The small church always lives with this perpetual inferiority complex,
Yep.
feeling that we're if we were any good, we'd be bigger, and so we don't take advantage of what it is that may be God's primary gift to us. Now, every gift can possibly be our greatest weakness as well, because we can become quite insular. But the small church is built for relationship. It's built on relationship, and there doesn't seem to be the same kind of performance expectations within the smaller church. So that allows us to take a breath a little bit and not try to swing for the stands, but to just start doing a few things that will be helpful. In a larger church, everything we try to do it bigger. That's our mantra. Like, can this whole thing be scaled? Is what we're always talking about. So we try to make it into a program, and we try to scale it and make it bigger. The small church doesn't have to work under that performance grid, and in many respects, it's keeping it smaller. And so instead of making it as big as it can be, maybe we could try to work on making it as small as it can be, within the communal context, and as informal and as personable and interpersonal as it can be, and that actually plays into the strengths of the smaller church, where those deep, generation long relationships are already there in most cases. And so it's simply a retraining of ourselves to see what God has actually given to us, that that the larger churches are always trying to replicate, but they can't. Yeah, because that's that is a particular gift that that the small church does have.
Wow. Excellent. That yeah, you're touching on a number of things that we could go on for hours and hours about. But let me ask you a question now. It are there particular writers, mentors, other people that you would suggest for small church leadership that they just take a look at for understanding particularly spiritual formation?
Well, yeah, there is no lack
Well, that's true.
of of places to look. And again, I think it's important to try to keep it simple, because small church pastors don't always have as much time as they would like. Um, but to kind of go to the sources where there are reputable voices. So, for instance, Richard Foster, Celebration of Discipline, Dallas Willard, The Spirit of the Disciplines. Those are
Excellent.
very important. They are excellent grounding works. Pretty much anything they write is important. You can go a little more popular, but usually the more popular you get, you kind of lose some of the gravitas.
Okay.
So you need to kind of watch that a little bit. You don't want to become overly elitist on this either, but you just want to make sure that you're grounded well. And so if you stick with some of those kind of modern day classics, you're well off. They're well, Eugene Peterson would be another. He had written voluminously just
Yes.
for years and years. Some helpful ones, Canadians even. So Mark Buchanan
Oh yeah.
has written some good. His book on spiritual rhythm, I think, is his best.
Hmm.
It's a very helpful book. He's written others as well that are good. He's written one on the Sabbath and one on the discipline of walking, which is also good. So pay attention to those Canadians. Ruth Haley Barton,
Yeah.
because I don't just want to mention guys. She is an excellent writer as well. Um, uh, Pete Scazzaro, his emotionally healthy everything.
Yeah.
He's written
Exactly.
all kinds of books on that. He's quite good as well. Uh, I would mention as well, I have a good friend, Richard Hovey, who is the
Okay.
executive director of Renovari Canada.
Ah.
And that's Richard Foster and Dallas Willard's
Yeah.
parent church
Combination. Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
So they have a Canadian branch of that now,
Mhm.
and Richard and those that are in Renovari Canada offer all kinds of resources, retreats, that sort of thing. They are able to curate resources for people who are interested. They have I believe it's a 2-year certification program in spiritual formation, and so getting in touch with Renovari Canada would be helpful as well.
Mhm.
I just said keep it simple, then I give you way too many
Yeah.
things to look at. But I mean, don't use all of those,
Okay.
at least tomorrow. But there's just a lot of really good resources out there if you use discernment, and
Mhm.
that's one of the gifts that God is giving the evangelical church these days, where we were a little hesitant in past times, figuring that we didn't want to wander into an area that maybe we should not have, that was a little too mystical for
Yeah.
our rationalistic bent. And now a lot of that has definitely been redeemed by those who have really solid voices, calling us to this close relationship uh, with the triune God.
Well, I hate to say it, but our time's pretty well up already. And I'm going to leave you with one question that I ask in these podcasts all the time. I just say, if you had one piece of advice, whatever it may be, to give to small church pastors, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, in terms of spiritual formation, I'd say just keep it simple, keep it personal. I think we have overemphasized the sense of sight to the detriment of the other four senses, and that has made a good portion of our spirituality overly heady and cerebral. I think we need to introduce balance and to be whole persons in what it is that we do. So just take it easy, take it simple, but make it personal.
Yeah.
And recognize that you are interacting along with your brothers and sisters with the triune God, the creator, sustainer, and redeemer uh, of all creation.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that, you don't get caught into the legalism of having to do your disciplines. These are things you get to do.
Mm-hmm.
Prayer is the transforming friendship, and journaling is where you're writing to God and hearing back. It by maintaining that personal perspective. I think Augustine talks about ordering our loves
Mm.
to make it that kind of personal will keep the fire burning, even in
Yeah.
times when we have low energy and we're not maybe hitting on all eight cylinders.
Sounds like a James K. Smith type of thing here too. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
could
could
go
have
on and
mentioned
on.
him too.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Well, Blayne, thank you very, very much. We've appreciated this. Thanks again.
oh, it's my pleasure, Ron. Thank you very much.